Hey guys, tonight we slip past the Iron Curtain and into the gray-lit corridors of Cold War Berlin. It's 1962. The wall has gone up. Families are split. Tensions are high. And your greatest luxury today might be a functional radio or a slice of stale bread. You're not a spy. You're not a defector. You're just trying to survive on the wrong side of a cement wall, built to keep freedom out and everyone else in. The good news, you're alive. The bad, the wallpaper's peeling, the heating's broken, and the state knows what you had for dinner. Probably before you did. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the groan of old plumbing and a radio blaring from your neighbor's flat marching music. Or maybe a speech. Could be from the state. Could be a broadcast from the West bouncing over the wall. Either way, it's your alarm clock. The room you sleep in is called an apartment, but it's really a glorified box with furniture issued by function and fabric that screams communist utility. The floor creaks, the plaster peels. The wallpaper has a pattern that looks like regret, and yet this is yours. You share it with two other adults in a rotating cast of borrowed belongings. The light bulb above your head flickers like it's afraid of being watched, which, to be fair, everything is. The telephone is tapped. The hallway has ears. Your cousin once made a joke about the Stasi in 1959. He hasn't told another joke since. Your bed is thin and lumpy, a sort of mattress sandwich of horsehair, cotton, and betrayal. You wake up sore and semi-political. Your pillow is mostly fabric wrapped around tired air. You've learned to rotate it to find the one soft corner. You sit up. You listen. It's a skill now distinguishing the silence of paranoia from the silence of plumbing failure. Today, it's both. You stretch your back, which sounds like a symphony of cracked vinyl, and rub the frost from the inside of the window pane. Your breath fogs up immediately. Across the street, a curtain moves. Someone is either airing laundry or observing. You wave anyway. There's a framed portrait of Ulbricht above the table. Government issued, dust coated. He watches over your breakfast like a bureaucratic saint. You tried to replace it with a calendar once. You were asked politely to stop. Your mother keeps your ration cards in a tin on the shelf. They're folded carefully, like sacred texts. One missing stamp means no meat. Two means suspicion. You once considered trading one for a West German chocolate bar. You still dream about that bar. Historians still argue whether East Berlin's control systems were about protection or performance. You argue that if someone watches you eat cabbage often enough, it stops being a meal and starts being surveillance. You head to the sink. The water takes its time. First brown, then clearish, then maybe drinkable. You splash your face. It smells faintly metallic and politically ambivalent. There's bread on the counter. Black bread, dense, dry, incapable of minor blunt force trauma. You slice it thin. One slice for breakfast, another saved for later. Butter, no. You have a smear of spread, which is beige, flavorless, and possibly made of old speeches. You sit down at the table. Someone's boiled coffee substitute made from roasted barley. Because caffeine is for capitalists, and it steams like a real beverage. You sip it anyway. Your tongue remembers coffee. Your brain pretends. You look out the window again. The wall stands in the distance, gray, solid, unmoved, like the weather, like the mood, like your neighbor's habit of stomping 3 times before he flushes. This is how your day begins. Not with sunshine, not with birdsong, but with gray light, gray bread, and the vague sensation that your thoughts are being audited. Welcome to East Berlin. The nights don't feel like nights anymore. Just longer stretches of gray time with fewer noises and more awareness of how loud your breathing sounds under 3 scratchy blankets. You sleep lightly, not from choice, but because deep sleep is a luxury reserved for people not living 5 blocks from an international political standoff. You wake up twice, once from the distant roar of a Soviet truck backfiring, and once because the radiator made a sound like it was reconsidering its purpose. You get used to it. The silence isn't peaceful, it's suspicious. You listen for unusual footsteps in the stairwell, the creak of a hallway door that shouldn't be opening at 2:47 a.m., or the sound of your neighbor's child coughing through the thin plaster wall. Your bed is more symbolic than supportive. A cot frame topped with a pad that once resembled a mattress now just vaguely impersonates one. The stuffing has migrated to the corners, forming little pillows of disappointment that puff up like they're trying to escape. You shift. The springs wheeze. You stay still. Above your head is a water stain shaped exactly like East Germany, which feels like a joke. You try not to stare at it too long. You're cold, but not winter in Siberia cold, more of a your toes forgot how to be toes kind of cold. The radiator tries, but the state-issued heating schedule says the building only gets a few hours of warmth each day. Which hours, that's classified. You wear 2 pairs of socks to bed and tuck the edges of your blanket into your pajamas like a child preparing for emotional warfare. One of those blankets used to be a curtain. The other is wool. If you define wool as fibers that itch and judge you. You once tried a hot water bottle. You boiled water on the stove and poured it into an old juice bottle, wrapped in a scarf. It lasted 30 minutes and left a damp spot on the sheets. You now rely on body heat and resentment. Dreams come, but rarely, and when they do, they're often about bread, or the western side, or standing at a store shelf filled with things that don't require bartering or bribing. Sometimes you dream about bananas. One time you dreamed about toothpaste. That one was oddly emotional. Historians still argue whether East Berliners adjusted to the surveillance state by developing psychological resilience or simply forgetting what peace of mind felt like. You suspect both. You've become good at folding your thoughts before you sleep, tucking the dangerous ones under your pillow, and only dreaming in phrases approved by the local committee. Your bedroom window faces west. Well, technically, it faces a building that faces west. But still on clear nights, you pretend. You imagine the lights in the distance are more than just industrial yards, that there's music on the other side, instead of more smokestacks and security lights. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, you catch a whisper of American radio, distorted by static, but unmistakable. Music that sounds like rebellion, or freedom, or just a better mattress. Your roommate shifts in the bed across the room. He snores in Morse code, probably unintentionally. You once made the mistake of writing it down. Now you don't? The clock ticks. It's not digital. It's not accurate. But it's reliable in a way only something wound by hand and ignored by the government can be. You count the ticks like a lullaby. Not because it helps, but because it fills the gap where silence gets too loud. The street outside is empty. A dog barks. A bottle breaks. Someone coughs on the floor above you. Sleep does come eventually. Not fully, not deeply, but enough to forget where you are for an hour. Enough to wake up not entirely defeated, because in divided Berlin, sleeping isn't rest, it's rehearsal for whatever comes next. The bathroom is down the hall, communal, dimly lit, and spiritually unpleasant. You shuffle toward it in your slippers, one sock falling down and the other soaked from yesterday's pipe leak. The air is stale, heavy with humidity and regret. The light bulb above flickers once, then remembers its purpose. You nod in appreciation. That's about all the consistency you're getting today. The door sticks. You give it a polite shove. Inside, the Floor tiles are permanently damp, and the walls have a fine bloom of mildew that looks vaguely artistic if you squint and surrender all standards. There's a single toilet shared by 6 families. Sometimes it flushes. Other times it makes a groaning sound, like it's apologizing in Russian. Today it flushes halfway. You accept it. This is a victory. The toilet paper roll is gone. Again, you check behind the cistern, beneath the radiator, and inside the cupboard of unspoken horrors. Nothing. Eventually, you find a folded newspaper page tucked into a cracked soap dish. It's last week's Neues Deutschland, featuring a column on factory quotas. You tear off a corner. It feels like treason, but not the worst thing that's happened in here. There's a poster peeling above the sink. Sauberkeit ist sozialistisch. Cleanliness is socialist. You haven't seen real soap in days. Just a waxy cube that smells like a chemistry experiment and refuses to lather unless you recite Marxist slogans. You turn the tap. Cold water. Always cold. It drips slowly, like it's charging rent per drop. You wash your hands with grim resolve and give your face a splash for symbolic freshness. Your nose runs in protest. You wipe it on your sleeve. That's what sleeves are for now. You glance at the mirror above the sink. It's cracked in the corner, turning your reflection into a Picasso sketch of fatigue. Your hair is flat, your eyes are puffy, and your skin has achieved that perfect combination of damp and chalky. You smile anyway, just to see what it looks like. It's not encouraging. Historians still argue whether East Berlin's housing infrastructure was functional or just a quiet form of punishment. You decide it's both. The building technically stands. The plumbing technically works. And yet, every bathroom visit feels like an act of endurance. You bring your own towel. If you leave it in the bathroom, it walks off. Not from theft, just from necessity. Someone will borrow it, forget it's yours, and swear it was always theirs. You know better now. The shower, when it's operational, releases a thin, lukewarm stream of water that smells of old coins. Today it doesn't work. You consider a sponge bath. Then you remember you have no sponge and no bath. So you wet a flannel and pat down the important zones. This is known as a proletarian rinse. There's a rumor that someone in Block C has a private bathroom with tiles that match, with hot water, possibly even a plastic toilet seat. You've never confirmed it. That kind of luxury lives in whispers. The radiator in the hallway hums gently as you step out. It emits more noise than heat. You warm your hands above it anyway. A small act of comfort before you head back to your room to face the state-issued breakfast and the state-approved news. You pass the woman from 3B. She nods at you without smiling. No one talks too much in the hallway. Walls have ears. Floors have ears. Ears have ears. You return to your flat. Dry your face on your scarf, and tick survive the bathroom off your mental to-do list. Because here, hygiene isn't about sparkle. It's about proof that you're still functioning, still playing along. Even if the soap doesn't even... Breakfast is already waiting on the table. Well, not breakfast so much as a food-shaped suggestion. One slice of dense, dark rye bread, the kind you could use as a coaster or minor construction material. A dab of synthetic margarine, pale and vaguely oily, spread with the precision of someone who knows this is their only fat allocation for the day. No jam. Jam is for children of party officials. You are not one. There's a tin cup of Café Ersatz coffee substitute, made from roasted chicory and sadness. It smells like burnt wood and tastes like a bad memory. You sip it anyway, because it's warm, and warmth counts. If you close your eyes and hum softly, you can almost imagine it's real coffee. Almost. You check the kitchen shelf. There's half a cabbage, a jar of pickled beets, and something in a tin that lost its label 3 months ago. You think it's liverwurst. You hope it's liverwurst. It might be wallpaper paste. The radio hisses in the corner. You're not sure if it's state news or state-approved weather. It doesn't matter. The forecast is always gray with a chance of surveillance. You grab your ration card and examine it like a rare treasure. You've still got this week's meat stamp, technically good for 100 grams. If the butcher actually has meat. Last time, he had sausage. Kind of. Mostly filler. Some meat-like substance. And a texture that resembled shoe sole marinated in vinegar. You didn't ask questions. You chewed politely and said thank you. There's a queue already forming outside the Konsum grocery store. You join it automatically, like a reflex. You don't even know what they're selling today. Could be potatoes, could be eggs, could be nothing. You wait anyway, because if you don't, someone else gets whatever it was that didn't exist in the first place. After 20 minutes of shifting foot to foot, you reach the front. No eggs, no bananas, those are mythical. No oranges. The man in front of you asks about milk. The cashier laughs and says, "Try again next week." You get a handful of pasta and a pat on the back. You pretend it was worth it. Historians still debate whether East Berlin's rationing was about fairness or control. You believe it's about patience and cabbage. So much cabbage. Lunch is whatever you can scavenge. Maybe soup, made from bouillon cubes, a grated potato, and some optimism. You once had chicken. Once. It was 1960. A party official dropped a drumstick at a rally. You swear it was the best thing you've ever tasted. Your neighbor knocks on the door and offers you a sugar cube in exchange for some instant mashed potatoes. You accept. You will guard this sugar cube like a diamond. You consider saving it for tea, or a birthday, or the end of communism, whichever comes first. Dinner is leftovers from lunch, plus maybe a slice of wurst. If the stars align and you've said nothing critical about the government in at least 6 months, most days, you just eat more bread, or a potato sliced so thin you can almost see through it. You add vinegar for flavor and for emotional depth. You once saw a West Berlin TV broadcast where people casually discussed snacking. The word feels decadent. You haven't snacked in years. Snacking requires surplus. You don't live in surplus. You live in structure deprivation, with occasional salt. You eat in silence. You always eat in silence. Not because it's sacred, but because you never know who's listening. Food is the one thing you don't joke about. You never ask why there's no meat. You just say, maybe next week, and chew a little slower. Because in East Berlin, meals aren't nourishment. They're proof of submission. Chew quietly, swallow slowly. And don't forget to thank the system, even if it tastes like disappointment. You open the wardrobe with the reverence of someone inspecting an archaeological site. Inside, there are exactly 3 outfits: your work clothes, your slightly less awful work clothes, and a sweater that's older than the current political regime. All of it smells faintly of soap, substitute, and past winters. You grab the one with the fewest holes and hold it up to the light. It's technically intact. Emotionally, it's unraveling. Your trousers are stiff with starch, or maybe it's just cold. The knees are shiny, the hems are frayed, and there's a safety pin holding the zipper together. You had a belt once. It now serves as a shoelace for your left boot. The shoes. Oh, the shoes. Once noble, now heroic. Leather worn thin, soles patched with tire rubber in defiance. The right one has a squeak. The left one leans to the left, possibly a political metaphor. You step into them carefully, because you've learned the hard way that repaired doesn't mean reliable. And because socks are a fragile species, your socks are a marvel of modern mending. They've been stitched, patched, darned, and whispered to. You've considered naming them. One is practically translucent. The other is holding together out of spite. You pull them up gently. One falls anyway. Over it all. You drape your winter coat. It's state-issued, made from material that can only be described as scratchy despair. And it weighs roughly the same as your sense of duty. Buttons are mismatched. The lining is threadbare, but it's warm. And it doesn't scream defector. So it's a keeper. On your head, a hat that once resembled wool, now it's mostly lint and memory. The brim curls inward. Embarrassed to be seen. You wear it anyway. Because ears freeze fast in East Berlin. Historians still argue whether East German fashion was utilitarian brilliance or morale eroding tedium. You argue it was neither. It was just what there was. Function over form. Gray over hope. You look in the mirror. You resemble every other person on your block. Which is the point. In a society where standing out is suspicious, blending in is a survival skill. Bright colors, suspicious. New clothes, definitely suspicious. Western brands, arrestably suspicious. Everyone looks like they're dressed for a funeral that never ends. People repurpose curtains into skirts, knit scarves from recycled yarn, and swap buttons like currency. You once saw someone wearing a coat made from old military blankets. It looked warm and terrifying. You pass a clothing shop on your way to work. The window display hasn't changed in 3 years. A mannequin wears a brown jacket and trousers that look like they were made for a scarecrow with strong political views. There's a sign that reads, "Any you knew," which is optimistic at best. Inside. The clerk watches you like you might ask about denim. You don't. You're not reckless. You walk past a woman wearing tights with a ladder running from ankle to thigh. She's used nail polish to stop it from spreading a trick taught by her grandmother, who also survived a shortage of everything. You nod respectfully. That's wartime couture. Your gloves are mismatched. One was yours. The other came from a trade with a friend who needed a sock. You think you got the better end of the deal. It has all its fingers. Laundry day is a calculated risk. Will your clothes survive? The basin soak? Will the washing? Soap stretch to cover 2 shirts? Will the radiator be generous enough to dry them before mold joins the conversation? You wash your scarf? Hang it above the stove. And pray. You once tried to remove an ink stain with vinegar? It removed the color around the stain instead. You declared it modern art and wore it proudly. Fashion magazines from the West sometimes make it over the wall. Not officially, of course. You once saw a page from one. A woman smiling in a red dress. She had lipstick, earrings, shoes with heels. You stared at it for a full 5 minutes before someone whispered, "You should burn that." You did, eventually, in East Berlin. Clothes are not identity. They're inventory. They tell people whether you work, whether you comply, and whether you're cold. Spoiler, you are. But at least the coat still fits. Your tooth has been throbbing for 3 days. Not constantly, just enough to remind you who's in charge. It pulses when you drink. It hums when you eat. And it wails like a betrayed opera singer when you breathe in cold air. You've tried clove oil. You've tried pressing your cheek against the wall. You've even tried pretending it's not happening. But it is. You finally brave the local Clinica squat. Concrete block that smells like disinfectant. Bureaucracy. And post-war trauma. The woman at the desk takes your name and doesn't smile. You sit in the waiting area beside a child chewing a pencil, and an old man clutching a tooth in a napkin like a rare treasure. The light flickers. The air is cold. The dentist is behind the 3rd door on the left, and you don't know if you're more afraid of the procedure or of asking the wrong question. Your name is called. You enter. The dentist's chair is cracked. The tray holds tools that look like medieval instruments and sound like threats. The dentist doesn't say much. He simply gestures, and you sit, obediently, fearfully. Prepare to sacrifice your molar for the socialist dream. He pokes. He prods. He grunts. You ask, will there be anesthesia? He raises an eyebrow, like that's a punchline. No? Of course not. This is East Berlin. Pain builds character, and character builds nations. He begins. You grip the armrests with the fury of the proletariat. The drill buzzes with the enthusiasm of a chainsaw on a deadline. You try to remember your grandmother's apple cake, or the sound of a bicycle on cobblestones. Anything but this. Historians still debate whether dental care in the Eastern Bloc was truly inferior or simply more direct. You suspect it was designed to remind you who controls your smile. You leave the clinic with a face full of numbness and sorrow. He didn't fill the tooth. He removed it, gave you a cotton swab and a nod. You thank him anyway, because it's over, and because complaining is frowned upon, or recorded, or both. Back at home, your jaw aches. You press a tea towel against it and sip soup made from onion skins and the leftover hope from yesterday's ration. It stings. Everything stings. You brush your teeth with baking soda, or, when that runs out, salt. The toothbrush is a relic wooden handle, coarse bristles, and a surprising amount of splinters. You're due for a new one. But the supply shipment is delayed. Again, your neighbor swears by chewing parsley. You have no parsley. Another friend uses vodka. You don't ask how they got it. You once read a Western magazine that mentioned whitening toothpaste. The idea made you laugh until your jaw locked. There's a mouthwash at the pharmacy, mint-flavored and mildly radioactive. Judging by the burn, you use it on special occasions, like state holidays or tooth extractions. Every time you pass the mirror, you check to see if the gap is visible. It is? But you tell yourself it gives you character, or at least street credibility. Some people go years without seeing a dentist. Not out of fear, out of strategy. If they can't fix your tooth, they'll just take it. And once it's gone, you can't get in trouble for chewing too loudly in meetings. One time, you heard someone say, every missing tooth is a victory. For the revolution, you laughed. Quietly, internally, you still remember who said it, though. Your brother once tried to pull his own tooth with pliers. It didn't end well. The pliers survived. His dignity did not. Eventually, the pain fades. You get used to chewing on one side. Your smile becomes slightly lopsided. Your confidence does too. Because in East Berlin, dental hygiene isn't about health. It's about endurance and silent suffering, preferably without anesthetic. You rise before dawn, not because you're ambitious, but because the building's water pressure dies at 6:45 a.m. And if you want even a dribble to wet your face, you have to beat the other 12 people on your floor. Plus, the factory whistle is punctual. Your dreams, on the other hand, are not. Work is not a choice. Not here. Everyone works. Everyone is useful. If you're not working, you're probably being watched. And if you're being watched, congratulations, you're now the most interesting person in your block. You slip into your overalls, gray, unflattering, and smelling faintly of machine oil and resignation. The buttons are stubborn and the zipper catches, but it's state issue. So it's patriotic to wear. The boots are 2 sizes too large. You've stuffed the toes with newspaper, which gives every step a crinkly soundtrack. Your shoes now double as walking pamphlets. You march through streets still shrouded in cold fog. People don't talk. They nod, occasionally grunt. Eye contact is like currency rare and not freely traded. A passing soldier eyes your lunch tin. You nod in a way that says, there's only cabbage in here. Comrade, which is sadly true. Your job assembly line, precision welding. Repetition is almost spiritual. Line up the panel, bolt it, check the seal. Line up the panel, bolt it. Forget who you are for a few hours. That's a blessing. You stand beside Frau Dietrich. She hums lullabies while working. Always a half beat out of tune. Her fingers are calloused but precise. You once saw her stitch a tear in someone's overalls with a piece of thread from her sock. Some say she used to be a pianist. Others say she's just bored. Historians still argue whether East Berlin's factories fostered quiet genius or just crushed spirits with perfect rhythm. The foreman paces like a disappointed uncle, clipboard in hand. He notes the number of panels you finish per hour. You're supposed to hit 26. You hit 23. But you smile as if you hit 30, just in case. Lunch is at 11:30 sharp. You get 22 minutes. You sit on a concrete step outside the building with your tin. Inside, 2 boiled potatoes and a sliver of sausage that might be from this decade. You trade jokes with Peter from maintenance. Jokes about capitalism, mostly. Carefully worded. Laughter is rationed. 2. After lunch, the grind resumes. Your muscles ache and your knees protest. And your back writes poetry in pain. But you weld. You focus. You forget. One day, your shift will end. And you'll get your pay stub, a piece of paper confirming your usefulness. Women, they work, too. In offices, in factories, in fields. Then they go home and work some more. Laundry, cooking, parenting, revolutionaries with dish soap. You once saw a woman breastfeed with one hand while taking inventory with the other. Efficiency is beauty. Children aren't exempt. School ends early so they can help at home. Your neighbor's son delivers coal after class. His boots are too big. He smiles anyway, probably because his boots aren't made of cardboard like last year. You heard of a man who refused to work, just stopped showing up. Said he wanted to write poetry full-time. By Thursday, he had relocated to the countryside for ideological realignment. Rumor has it he now milks goats and writes haikus about hay. You clock out at 6. Your hands shake slightly. Your spine makes a cracking sound that would concern a chiropractor if you had access to one. You sign your time card with a pen that ran out of ink 2 weeks ago, but you're still pretending it works. That's how most systems run here, momentum and optimism. You walk home in the dimming light. A woman on the corner sells pickles from a jar. They're soft and sour, just like your worldview. You buy one. It squeaks when you bite it. That's probably a good sign. You reach your building. The elevator's broken again. You climb 5 flights, knees audibly complaining. You pass a man fixing a radio with tweezers. His window glows with quiet defiance. The Beatles leak softly from the speaker. It feels illicit and beautiful. You reach your flat, take off your boots, and collapse onto the bed. Your pillow smells like shampoo from a memory. You've worked, you've survived, you've earned your ration of dreams. Because in Cold War Berlin, hard labor doesn't just pay the bills. It keeps you invisible. And sometimes, invisibility is the safest place to be. You wake the next morning to a sound that could either be rain or Soviet radio static. Spoiler, it's both. The window leaks. So does the wall. You tug your blanket tighter, but it's mostly symbolic, like the illusion of privacy in a shared apartment block. Weather in Berlin is not so much a background detail as it is a supporting antagonist. It has moods, it has opinions, and most of those opinions are aggressive. In winter, your breath fogs up in the hallway, indoors. The tiles sweat cold. The air is so dry, it gives your nose paper cuts. You open the tap, and the water debates whether it wants to remain a solid. Heating. That's reserved for those who paid their coal quota or knew someone in the Ministry of Fuel Distribution. You, meanwhile, layer socks over socks and pretend wool is thermal magic. You go to sleep in a sweater and a hat, sometimes gloves. Your breath paints clouds on the bedroom air like a bad steampunk novel. You curl into a ball so small, your organs huddle for warmth. You wonder if this is how hedgehogs emotionally survive February. But then comes summer, and you'd gladly sell your spleen for a breeze. The buildings trap heat like oversized bread ovens. the air turns into soup, thick and inescapable. Your walls radiate warmth like judgmental grandparents. You fan yourself with last week's propaganda leaflet. It claims our future is bright. You believe them because your room is 38 degrees Celsius. You sit near the window, which is open, of course. That only helps mosquitoes find you faster. Berlin's summer mosquitoes are punctual, efficient, and possibly employed by the state. They hum lullabies of revolution as they feast on your ankles. Clothing doesn't help. You strip to essentials. But your essentials are still made of recycled potato sacks. They scratch, they chafe, they trap heat like betrayal. You envy children who run barefoot through cracked courtyards with wet shirts over their heads. They look like jellyfish of freedom. And then out of nowhere, a summer storm. Glorious, fierce, full of thunder that rattles your borrowed spoons. You run to the window for relief, only to find the rain is coming sideways. You close the window. It leaks anyway. You place a bucket beneath the drip and celebrate your architectural foresight. Historians still argue whether East Berlin architecture was designed for endurance or simply to test the limits of human comfort. Either way, the walls endure. Your patience, not so much. In spring, the city pretends to be poetic. Blossoms sneak onto trees. Birds try out harmonies. You smile until you realize pollen has weaponized. Your nose becomes a fountain. Your eyes itch like government secrets. You sneeze in triplets and sound like a broken fax machine. Allergy meds exist on the other side of the wall. Autumn, meanwhile, is the prankster. It starts off crisp and romantic, like a film set. People wear scarves like they have secrets. The air smells like burnt leaves and damp philosophy. But within weeks, it turns moody. Slush creeps into boots. The wind develops opinions. It slaps you in the face like it's personal. You try to dry laundry, but the sun clocks out early. Clothes hang on lines like surrendered flags. By November, you wonder if socks ever fully dry, or if perpetual dampness is just your new religion. Still, some find joy in the weather. Kids skate on frozen puddles. Old men sunbathe shirtless on cracked balconies. A woman on the third floor grows tomatoes in repurposed soup cans. Hope survives in odd containers. You adapt. You learn to keep salt by the door in winter, to sleep with one leg outside the blanket in summer, to always carry a spare scarf, not for fashion, but because doors slam shut unexpectedly, and sometimes you need to cushion your face. And when you finally make peace with the climate, when you accept that your flat has two modes, glacier and greenhouse, it rains diagonally just to remind you who's boss. You do not control the weather, but if you survive it with all your toes intact, you earn bragging rights, and possibly pneumonia. The faucet stutters, coughs, and then releases something between a dribble and a threat. You hold your chipped enamel mug beneath it, hoping for water that is at least 2 out of 3 things clean, clear, and not aggressively metallic. The result, lukewarm rust with a hint of irony. Water in divided Berlin is not guaranteed. It is a privilege, a puzzle, and sometimes a political statement. On a good day, your tap delivers the bare minimum. On a bad day, it reminds you why bottled soda became a status symbol. You boil it because boiling is what separates you from dysentery. Or, at the very least, from impressively creative intestinal adventures. Even so, the kettle has sediment lining its bottom like an archaeological dig. You pretend not to see it. You drink anyway. Thirst doesn't negotiate. Bathing is not a daily habit. It's a monthly event with RSVP. The bathtub, located in a shared utility room, is filled by ladling hot water from the stove. That's assuming you've secured the coal ration. The heating works, and your neighbors haven't already claimed bath privileges for the week. You wash fast, like the water is borrowed time. Because it is. The soap smells like soap-shaped regret. No bubbles, just grit. Shampoo. You mean the bar of laundry soap with a hand-drawn label that reads herbal. You emerge cleanish, but also chilled to your soul. The room has no insulation, and your towel has the absorbency of a worn t-shirt. You dry yourself while standing on yesterday's newspaper, which now sticks to your feet and leaves the headline, "Production increases in tractor sector," across your toes. Some skip bathing altogether, leaning heavily on perfumes and deodorants if they can afford black market imports. Others swear by vinegar or lemon, or simply not caring. The nose adapts, or pretends to. Either way, you get used to the scent of damp humanity and shared walls. Laundry is an endurance sport. Washing machines are few, and dryers are a Cold War fantasy. You scrub your clothes in a basin using a washboard like it's 1923, then wring them out by hand and hang them on a line that runs across your kitchen ceiling. A single pair of pants drips for 3 days, making spaghetti preparation a sort of wet sock obstacle course. Even after all that effort, your shirts still smell vaguely like whatever was cooking next-door cabbage stew, or existential despair. Historians still argue whether hygiene practices in Cold War Berlin were shaped more by scarcity or stubborn tradition. Either way, bathing became a badge of resourcefulness and a risk. After all, hot water opens your pores, and open pores are an invitation to disease. This is not medical advice. This is state-sponsored science. Apparently, water isn't just for washing or drinking, it's for silence. The tap becomes your white noise machine. You sit beside it some nights just to hear something familiar and rhythmic, something you can control, even if barely. But sometimes it stops. No notice, no apology, just air in the pipes and the groan of empty plumbing. You wait, you sigh. You fill buckets during the good hours and hoard them like precious currency. You dream of rivers, lakes, swimming pools filled with possibility. And then you wake up, step into the hallway, and realize someone left the communal bathroom sink running again. Still, Berlin water is safer than many places. It won't kill you outright, just slowly test your resolve. So you sip, you rinse, you wipe down the sink with your one clean rag, and you carry on because you have no choice. And now, at last, you settle into bed. You've survived a day in divided Berlin. You've endured gray skies, beige dinners, soapless showers, and the sound of propaganda played 1 decibel too loud. You close your eyes. You listen to the drip. You wonder whether it's coming from the ceiling or your own kitchen pipe again. Either way, you're still alive. And for now, that'll do. And now, with your limbs sinking into the mattress and your thoughts drifting like smoke through crumbling alleys of divided Berlin, let it all soften. Let the cold tiles fade. Let the static quiet. The walls, once gray and unyielding, dissolve into watercolor. The drip of the faucet is no longer a frustration, but a lullaby. You've seen the ration lines, the curfews, the flicker of neon across checkpoint signs. You've trudged through seasons that wouldn't quit, brushed your teeth with salt, washed your socks in soup pots, but none of it touches you now. Not really. Not anymore. Outside, the city still hums. One side blinks with capitalism, the other whispers socialism. But here, in this stillness, you belong to neither. You are just breath. Warm, unbothered, free for once from choice. So exhale. Let the tension ease from your shoulders. Let history roll backward like film in reverse. Let yourself be carried not by ideology, but by rest. The future may be divided, but tonight, you are whole. Good night. Now, we begin in the dim hush of a candlelit nursery in 14th century England. A flickering tallow flame casts its tall, swaying shadows across the rush-covered floor. And you, yes, you are 3 years old, nestled awkwardly in a bed that smells faintly of damp wool and goat. Your linen gown scratches like bark. Your cheeks are cold despite the fur blanket. And somewhere downstairs, someone is arguing loudly about sheep. You would never think that a toddler's bedtime could hinge on a land treaty. But here we are. Your name is embroidered badly on the inside of your smock. That's because you're a girl of minor noble birth, which means two things. First, you'll never decide your own future. And second, someone else is already planning your wedding. A priest is expected soon. So is the groom. He's somewhere around 26 and has never once seen you. Because why would he? He's marrying your bloodline, not your baby teeth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Meanwhile, your toys consist of 3 wooden sheep, a carved spoon with no handle, and a rag doll stuffed with hay. You like the doll, though you're not sure why its eyes seem to stare through you. The nanny hums a Latin lullaby while fixing the crooked seams of a velvet gown the size of a potato sack. It's yours. You're to wear it tomorrow at your own marriage ceremony. You don't know this, of course. All you know is that your mother keeps crying into her sewing, and your father keeps smiling with the same grim enthusiasm he uses during tax disputes. The local friar has already practiced the wedding rites. He's slightly uncomfortable, but not enough to say no. After all, the contract is legal, and the church doesn't mind, as long as the marriage won't be consummated until later, much later, hopefully. Historians still argue whether these toddler weddings were seen as binding or symbolic. Some say it was merely a public promise of things to come. Others point out that land exchanges and dowries changed hands that very day, often with clauses so long they could pass for bedtime stories, if your bedtime stories included the word usufruct. You sit in a carved wooden chair, far too large for you, drinking watered wine from a cup bigger than your face. When you drop it, no one scolds you. They just chuckle and say, "She'll learn soon enough." Someone hands you a bread crust. It's hard enough to injure a squirrel. But that's your dinner. Bread, by the way, is a medieval test of survival if it doesn't kill your teeth. It might still kill your appetite. By now, you've stopped asking why your name is being said so often downstairs. You're busy poking the hay out of your doll and trying to feed it to the fire. The adults say this is a sign of ambition. You don't know what that means, but they seem pleased. You fall asleep to the sound of ink scratching on parchment. Somewhere, your future is being written by candlelight. It includes clauses about inheritance, duty, and your firstborn son, who, by the way, doesn't exist yet. But don't worry, you'll meet him someday. Possibly before you understand what marriage even is. You wake up to a flurry of footsteps and the smell of boiled onions. The nursery has been scrubbed, the bed linen swapped for ones that don't smell like mildew. And your doll has mysteriously disappeared, possibly to avoid the embarrassment of today's events. Today is your wedding. You are 3 years old. Someone helps you into the velvet gown, which still smells faintly of mothballs and ambition. It's stiff, purple, and entirely unforgiving. The sleeves hang like wet curtains. Downstairs, a priest is warming up his Latin, and a notary is already practicing his signature with the enthusiasm of a man who knows he'll be paid in pheasants. Your groom has arrived. He's 26, wearing tights, a smile shaped like dread, and has clearly just realized he'll be publicly pretending to marry a toddler. You offer him your crust of bread. He declines. The chapel is cold, stone cold, drafty cold, possibly ghost cold. You're carried in like a velvet-wrapped offering and placed beside your groom, who's doing his best to look solemn while avoiding eye contact with anyone under 4 feet tall. The guests include your father's business rivals, your mother's weeping cousin, and a dog with more awareness of the situation than half the congregation. You're asked to repeat words in Latin. You repeat them like a proud parrot who once heard a monk mutter during a storm. It doesn't matter if you get them wrong. You're wearing the dress. You showed up. That's most of your job done. Historians still argue whether child marriages like this were treated as serious legal events or elaborate social theater. Some point out that no real union occurred, at least not until puberty, while others dig up letters and contracts that suggest these arrangements were as binding as any adult union, just with more snack breaks. One particularly jaded chronicler noted, "Bride was in no way displeased. She had not the wit to be. After the ceremony, you're paraded through the hall like a novelty goblet. Some guests give you sweets, others pinch your cheeks. One elderly knight offers you a silver coin and tells you to buy yourself a new husband if this one rusts. You have no idea what that means. But it makes your mother laugh through her veil. Later, there's a wedding feast, which means barley stew for most and roasted duck for the important people. You are fed a spoonful of something gray and lumpy. It's either mashed turnips or a theological metaphor. Either way, it doesn't go down easily. Your husband, if we must call him that, gives you a ribbon for your doll. You thank him by sneezing directly into his wine. This is widely considered the highlight of the evening. At bedtime, the priest reminds everyone that the marriage is in name only until you reach a suitable age. Everyone nods too quickly. A few guests leave early. The notary pockets his pheasants and discreetly disappears into the fog. And just like that, you are a wife. A wife who still drinks from a wooden cup and can't pronounce inheritance. But none of that matters, because the ink is dried, the guests have toasted, and the cradle is officially full of contracts. By morning, you're back in the nursery, chewing the corner of a wooden block and wearing a wedding ring on a string around your neck so you don't swallow it. You're a married woman now, technically, but instead of romance, your days are filled with pottage, nursery rhymes, and trying not to fall into the fireplace. Meanwhile, downstairs, the real ceremony continues contract negotiations. Your dowry is the main attraction. Not your smile, not your hair, not your charming habit of calling chickens quack cows. No. What matters is that your marriage includes half a manor, some rights to a mill, and most hotly contested a patch of land that floods every spring, but might one day be valuable. In short, you're a very small chess piece on a very muddy board. The adults sit at a long oak table, arguing over parchment while drinking ale thicker than soup. They discuss your future with the same tone they use to haggle over pigs. Because in some ways, you are a pig, or at least, you're worth 4 of them plus a parcel of sheep. And, if negotiations go well, a promised goose. No one asks your opinion. You're busy trying to eat a flower. Historians still argue whether these dowry negotiations were primarily economic or political. Some believe they were tools to consolidate land and power. Others say they were simply the aristocratic version of eBay, except instead of bidding on vases, you bid on toddlers. One account describes a nobleman who married his son to a girl with teeth strong enough to crack walnuts, which was apparently a selling point. You are brought in briefly to be admired like an antique platter. Stand up straight. Someone whispers. You blink slowly. Someone asks if you can sing. You respond by screaming the first 2 syllables of a prayer. Everyone applauds, somewhat horrified. The dowry negotiation resumes with new vigor. Turns out, spirited temperament is also valuable as long as it can be tamed before you're 12. Sometimes, if the dowry is generous enough, the husband's family throws in a counter gift, a few cows, a bolt of fine cloth, maybe even a set of knives. These are not for you. These are for your father, the knives. However, might one day be yours if you survive to use them. And if you remember which ones are ceremonial and which are real. Spoiler, they're often the same. One fringe tale mentions a girl betrothed before birth. Her name was signed onto a land deed while she was still in the womb. Another family reportedly demanded a dowry that included a full-grown mastiff and an illuminated Bible. You, by comparison, are low maintenance. You mostly need a nap. Back in your room, the fire has gone out and your velvet gown has been stuffed into a chest. It won't be needed again for a few years at least until the marriage is confirmed. You sleep curled up next to your doll, now proudly wearing the ribbon your husband gave you. Somewhere downstairs, someone shouts, "But she's only 3." And someone else replies, "Yes, but she'll be 10 soon." It's comforting. Really, you're growing up in a world that believes time is negotiable. You are now 7 years old, which in medieval terms makes you practically a seasoned diplomat. You've grown an inch, maybe 2, lost 3 baby teeth 2 naturally, 1 via porridge-related incident, and are now able to curtsy without falling over an improvement nobody claps for. But every West expects you're still technically married, though you live nowhere near your husband. He writes once a year, presumably to your father, though the letters smell faintly of mildew and regret. In the meantime, your job is to become presentable. You begin lessons in embroidery, which is less about creativity and more about making flowers look sufficiently sad. Latin is drilled into your ears by a priest who speaks like a cheese vendor and has the patience of a cold stone. You memorize prayers, saints, and the order of precedence for feasts because, yes, even in silence, your elbows must reflect your status. You long to play outside, to chase chickens, or roll down the hill with your nursemaid son. But you are now considered too delicate for such things. 1 grass stain, and you'll be lectured for an hour on how noble blood must remain unblemished. You try, once, to climb a tree. It ends in a sprained ankle in an emergency prayer circle. Lesson learned: nobility has gravity. Historians still argue whether girls like you understood their situation. Were you resigned, confused, secretly rebellious? Letters from noble women for the time reveal moments of wit, frustration, and quiet resistance. One lady-in-waiting wrote of feigning illness for weeks to avoid an embroidery competition. Another reportedly learned to sword fight in secret, though that may just be wishful thinking by a 19th century translator. You aren't sure what to feel. Some days, you pretend your husband is a traveling knight on a dragon hunt. Other days, he's just a blurry figure who smells like wine and once patted your head. No one talks of love, because love is for troubadours, not tax documents. Instead, they speak of duty, which is basically love's accountant. Your mother prepares you for your eventual move to your husband's estate with the gentle anxiety of someone packing their daughter off to an avalanche. She teaches you to nod graciously when spoken to, how to weep politely if insulted, and how to place your hands so they appear devout rather than bored. She also shows you how to hide a coin in your sleeve. For emergencies, the older girls whisper about things they shouldn't. One says her sister was sent away at 9. Another claims that a cousin was married and shared a bed at 8, though even the adults look vaguely uncomfortable when asked if that's true. One friar claims no marriage is consummated before the girl is 12. Another winks and says, "It depends who's asking." Comforting. You sleep beneath a tapestry that shows a noblewoman riding a unicorn. You stare at it each night, wondering if the unicorn is real or just trying to escape like you. Either way, it never moves. Tomorrow, you turn 8. You'll be gifted a new cloak, another ring to wear on a string, and a lesson in table manners involving live eels. Childhood is slipping away, though no one told you when it officially ends. Maybe it was the day you signed your name beneath your husband's. You are 10 years old when the carriage arrives. The horses snort clouds of breath into the cold morning air, and your mother fusses over your sleeves like a woman trying to stall time itself. It doesn't work. You are leaving. The house where you learned to read, to curtsy, and to eat peas without looking happy, gone in a rattle of wheels and anxious goodbyes. Your husband's manor is large, gray, and appears to have been designed by someone who hated sunlight. The windows are arrow slits. The corridors smell like wet stone and overcooked cabbage. And the fire in your new room is more ceremonial than effective. You are greeted by servants who bow too deeply and speak too quickly. Some call you milady. One accidentally calls you the child. No one corrects them. Your husband is waiting. He is older than you remembered older than your father. In fact, and he greets you like one might greet a tax inspector or a mild headache. You are told to curtsy. You do. He nods and asks about your Latin. You answer in French. No one laughs. Historians still debate how often marriages like this led to early cohabitation. Some claim noble girls remained in their family homes until their teens. Others cite records of girls as young as 9 sent to live with their husbands, particularly if the family wanted the alliance sealed publicly. One chronicler notes a girl who entered her lord's house as a bride and his library as a mystery. You're more interested in the whereabouts of your doll. Life in your new home is strange. You eat at a separate table, behind a curtain, because the other guests find your presence distracting. You're assigned a tutor who teaches you to recite family histories like bedtime stories, only with more battles and fewer happy endings. Your embroidery now includes tiny family crests, stitched so small they resemble angry birds. Your husband does not speak to you often. When he does, it's with the mild curiosity of someone encountering a riddle in a language they don't speak. He gifts you a small book of psalms and a dog that dislikes stairs. You name the dog Sir Snore. It becomes your closest confidant. At dinner, you are expected to sit still and smile if anyone makes eye contact, which they rarely do. You are not to speak unless spoken to. When you once try to ask for more broth, the steward blinks and says, "The lady wishes." What your voice does not yet carry weight, and your request is denied in favor of poached lamprey. There is no discussion of the wedding night, no mention of sharing chambers. The church forbids consummation before sufficient maturity, which is vague and deeply unhelpful. Historians suggest that some husbands waited until the bride was 14, while others did not wait at all. The records are silent deliberately so. As one scholar puts it, the absence of detail is its own answer. You begin to write letters home, careful to make them cheerful. You describe the garden dead, the dog aloof, and your happiness alleged. Your mother replies with thinly veiled worry and an extra scarf. You pretend that's enough. At night, you lie beneath heavy covers, listening to the wind batter the shutters. You trace your name in the dust on the windowsill. You try to remember the tune your nanny used to hum. The dog snores. Somewhere downstairs, someone laughs too loudly. You are 10. You are a wife. And tomorrow, you'll learn to pour wine without trembling. By 13, you've learned how to glide across a room without being noticed, how to accept compliments that feel like obligations, and how to respond to unsettling questions with a smile so vague it could be mistaken for sleep. You are no longer the curious little girl who ate flowers and hid coins in her sleeves. You are a wife in every sense, except, mercifully, one. Your husband still treats you like a rare book valuable. Unread, occasionally dusted. You dine together twice a week and converse in stiff Latin or awkward silences. When guests visit, you're introduced with a title you barely recognize and a smile that makes your cheeks hurt. It is expected that soon, very soon, you will begin fulfilling your real duties, the kind that involve heirs. Historians still debate whether church doctrine on consummation was taken seriously. Technically, the girl was supposed to be 12, but in practice, it depended on geography, family ambition, and the mood of the bishop. Some clerics refused to bless child marriages, while others saw no issue as long as the dowry was impressive. One nobleman reportedly sent a goose, 2 swans, and a bag of silver to encourage a priest's approval. The goose was returned. The priest, however, was not. At the manor, preparations begin. You're given a new wardrobe, complete with sleeves so wide they could double as wine sacks, and a veil heavy enough to double as emotional baggage. You begin woman's lessons, which include managing a household, hosting meals, and understanding childbirth through woodcuts and vague metaphors involving flowers. Moons and strong hips. You nod a lot. You understand very little. The older women give advice you don't ask for. One says, lie still. Think of God. Another whispers, it'll be over quickly if he's kind. The third just sighs and hands you a honey cake. You take long walks in the garden. Even when it rains, you name the statues. You talk to the trees. Sir Snore, the dog, has taken to following you like a shadow, sensing that you've grown quieter. Some days, you wish you could shrink back into yourself, back to the nursery, the velvet gown, the doll with the staring eyes. But you're too tall for hiding now. One fringe anecdote tells of a girl your age who faked a possession to delay her wedding night. She barked like a dog for 3 weeks. Eventually, the marriage was annulled. You consider it briefly, but you don't know how to bark convincingly. You only know how to nod. The ceremony marking your confirmation as wife approaches. It's a private affair, just a priest, a prayer, and a locked door. Your chamber is made ready with clean sheets, rose petals, and the thick scent of myrrh. You are told to bathe. You are told to pray. You are told nothing about what to expect, but everything about what is expected. That night, you lie in bed, heartbeat echoing like hoofbeats. The candle gutters. Your husband enters. He says nothing. He sits. He drinks. And eventually, mercifully, he falls asleep in the chair. You do not sleep. You do not cry. You simply stare at the ceiling and count every carved beam. There are 32. You count them again. At dawn, the maid finds you exactly as she left you motionless. Breath shallow, untouched, but not unchanged. You are 13, and the world is watching. You are 15 now. You know the sounds of night wind through broken shutters, the creak of old beams, the way footsteps echo differently when they bring news. This morning, the sound was different. 3 hurried knocks, followed by your maid whispering, "Milady, the midwife is here. Pregnancy, it seems, has found you. You didn't look for it, didn't wish for it, and certainly weren't prepared, but your stomach has begun to swell, and everyone is thrilled except you. Your husband congratulated you in a single sentence before returning to his stew." The steward smiled like a man who's just inherited a profitable orchard. And the priest blessed your womb like it was an altar. The midwife smells of rosemary and boiled vinegar. She presses your stomach, nods solemnly, and offers you a handful of dried herbs for bravery. You chew them. They taste like old socks and regret. Historians still debate whether childbirth in noble homes was safer than for peasants. On paper, noble women had better food, softer beds, and experienced midwives. But the statistics tell a crueler truth. 1 in 3 women died in or after childbirth, regardless of station. One account describes a young bride who died at 16, buried with a child still inside her. Another tells of a girl who survived 8 labors by 17. Neither is comforting. You are assigned a birthing chamber. Curtains are hung. Icons are polished, and every sharp object is removed from sight. You are told to pray to St. Margaret, the patron of childbirth, who once burst from the belly of a dragon. You whisper her name so many times it starts to sound like static. Food becomes a strange routine. You're fed soft things, mushy peas, fish boiled to oblivion, bread soaked in milk. Everything tastes like fear. You throw up in a rose bush. The dog looks worried. Your husband avoids your chambers now. When he does appear, he pats your shoulder like one would pat a new horse. His contribution is done. You, meanwhile, are expected to endure the rest without complaint. A chambermaid mentions the ring of fire and is promptly dismissed. Labor begins on a Tuesday, during a thunderstorm. Naturally, the midwife says, "Good sign, as if the sky isn't breaking in half." You scream once, then bite your hand to stay quiet. The pain is not pain, it's time. Pulling your body apart minute by minute, you lose track of hours, of people, of language. At some point, the priest arrives. You don't see him, but you hear the chanting. You whisper the psalms through gritted teeth. The child arrives not long after, a boy, breathing, screaming, alive. You are alive too, though it feels like a technicality. The nursemaid takes him away to be presented. You are too tired to object. You lie in bed, staring at your hands, wondering when they began to look like your mother's. Sir Snore climbs onto the bed and curls at your feet. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't say, "Congratulations." He just sleeps. Historians still argue whether girls like you celebrated motherhood or merely survived it. The records are vague, often focusing more on lineage than the woman who risked her life to continue it. Your name will go down in a ledger. Your child's will be engraved in stone. But no one will record how you wept quietly into a linen pillow while everyone else toasted your success. You are 17 when your husband dies. It happens quickly, at least. That's what the steward says. A fall from a horse, or possibly spoiled wine, or possibly his heart gave out, which is a medieval catch-all for we don't really know, and no one's going to investigate. The physician mumbles something about humors. The priest nods gravely. You nod too. Not because you believe it, but because that's what noble widows do. There's a ceremony, of course. Long, cold, and dripping with Latin. You sit in black silk with a veil that weighs nearly as much as your son. People bow to you. They offer condolences like they're passing soup. The hall smells of incense and uneaten meat. And just like that, you are no longer a child bride. You are a widow. It should feel like tragedy, but it feels more like release. Historians still argue how much autonomy widows really had. Some were immediately remarried, bundled off to new alliances like diplomatic luggage. Others wielded significant power managing estates, brokering deals, and raising armies. One particularly shrewd countess oversaw 5 castles, rewrote her dowry terms, and never remarried. Another simply vanished. You're not planning to vanish, but you're not planning to be handed off either. You have a son now, 3 years old and fond of hitting things with spoons. He looks like you around the eyes. His nursemaid insists he's clever. The steward insists he's valuable. You just think he's loud, but you like the sound of him. It fills the rooms your husband once muted with long silences and pointed sighs. You're advised to remarry. There are offers widowers, barons, even a bishop's nephew who has very fine ankles, according to your aunt. But you decline, politely, firmly. You are 17 and have lived 4 lives already. You'd like to try living one for yourself. The estate is technically yours now, at least in trust, until your son comes of age. You sign papers. You give orders. You walk the perimeter of your land like a general inspecting troops. The tenants bow lower than they used to. The steward asks before making decisions. You find you like the taste of command. You host dinners. You smile at guests. You pretend not to notice when they call you the girl widow behind your back. Let them. You're the one controlling the bread supply. And in medieval England, that's as close to divine power as it gets. One fringe account speaks of a lady who used her widowhood to fund a small militia and protect her village from raiders. Another gave all her money to nuns and took a vow of silence mostly. One suspects, to avoid hearing more advice. You haven't taken any vows, but you have stopped asking permission. You start writing letters again. This time, they're not cheerful fictions. They're sharp, businesslike, and occasionally sarcastic. You've discovered that sarcasm translates surprisingly well into Latin. Sir Snore is old now. He limps, sleeps more than he eats, and follows you everywhere like a furry regret. You carry him sometimes. He lets you. Your son asks once where his father went. You say, "He rode away, it's true." Enough. At night, you sit by the hearth, no longer waiting for anyone. You drink mulled wine, not because it's proper, but because you like the way the spices burn. You are 17, a widow, a mother, and for the first time, perhaps, just a person. You are 32 now, ancient, by the standards of your youth. The tapestries in your chambers have faded. So has the rush of voices whispering about your marriage, your widowhood, your future. Time has sanded your sharp corners into quieter shapes. You still walk the halls, still manage the accounts, still nod during long prayers, but now you do it with a half smile, as if in on a joke no one else knows. Young girls visit your estate, sometimes cousins, wards, daughters of distant kin. They flit through the corridors in velvet and confusion, practicing curtsies and pretending not to listen to the grown-ups bartering over their futures. You watch them carefully. They remind you of yourself. Too young for choice, too old for protection. One girl is 7, bright-eyed and already betrothed to a man she's never met. You help her lace her gown, gently guiding trembling hands. She whispers, "Will it hurt?" And you don't ask what she means. You just say. Eventually, it stops. Historians still argue whether women like you had any real legacy. Your name might appear in a will, on the edge of a stained charter, or carved into a family tree like an afterthought. But no record mentions your favorite ribbon. No chronicler describes the way you sang to yourself while counting apples. No monk ever copied your laughter into the margins of a manuscript. And yet you existed. You breathed. You survived. You endured. Not heroically, but stubbornly, quietly. You made peace with things no child should have faced, and found a rhythm in the slow patter of your own footsteps down familiar stone halls. Your son is nearly grown now, tall, serious, with your eyebrows and his father's posture. He'll inherit everything, soon title, land, expectations. You worry for him, not because he isn't ready, but because the world rarely waits until you are. You sleep more these days, not out of frailty, but because the dreams have finally softened. No more cries in the dark, no more silent counting of rafters, just warm beds, gentle dogs, and the slow, fading hum of the chapel bell. Sir Snore passed quietly one morning, wrapped in an old shawl beside the hearth. You buried him beneath the fig tree. You didn't cry. You just sat beside the earth until the sun dipped below the wall, painting the sky the color of old wine. Sometimes, you look at your wedding ring still strung on that same thread, now tucked in a wooden box beside your letters. You wonder if it ever fit, if it ever meant anything to anyone but the steward. You never wore it on your finger, but it left a mark, just the same. You've stopped asking what your life could have been. That version of you never existed. Instead, you lived this one, filled with veils and Latin, and bread so hard it could injure a goat. And that counts for something. The chapel where you'll be buried is quiet, cold, even in summer. A stone effigy will lie atop your tomb, serene. Folded hands, eyes closed, no smile. Just the soft suggestion of having finished something difficult. And you have? So, breathe out. Let the shadows curl gently across the walls. The wind outside has softened to a whisper. The candles gutter. The world turns. And you rest. Now, we step into a fog-draped morning just outside Paris. In the 14th century, church bells echo through the mist, but no one's smiling. There are no pedals on the road, no giggling girls sneaking sips of wine. This is a wedding, but the bride isn't breathing. She's not running late. She's dead. You would never think a corpse could say "I do." But welcome to medieval France, where legal formality, social shame, and stubborn love often override basic common sense. You stand among villagers in rough wool cloaks, trying to keep warm as the priest clears his throat for the third time. Everyone is pretending this is fine. The groom looks pale, but alive. His bride is not. She's been dressed in white and laid out in a decorated coffin, like an extremely stiff centerpiece. Her hands are folded over her chest, and someone, likely her mother, has placed a tiny silver ring on her finger already to speed things along. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. The air smells like damp earth, incense, and the sort of wine that's poured mostly out of obligation. A choir of confused-looking altar boys shuffles behind the coffin, trying not to look directly at the bride. The villagers murmur. You hear snippets, "It's for the baby," someone says. "They were supposed to wed on Sunday." Another voice adds, "The dowry's already been spent." Historians still argue whether these corpse weddings were truly common or just well-documented exceptions. France in the 14th century had a uniquely legalistic obsession with reputation, especially among the noble and merchant classes. If a couple was betrothed, and one died unexpectedly, families sometimes insisted the wedding proceed, especially if property, pregnancy, or scandal were involved. In this case, it's rumored the bride died of a sudden fever the day before the ceremony. The family had already paid for everything, including the roast goose. Canceling would mean ruin. And besides, as one clerk reportedly wrote, the soul is gone, but the contract remains. You try to blend into the background as the priest begins. His tone wavers between holy reverence and, "Please do not put this in my annual report." The groom kneels beside the coffin, reciting vows to a person who can no longer hear them, though, given medieval marriage customs. That part isn't entirely new. There's something deeply surreal about watching rings exchanged with rigor mortis. You try not to focus on the bride's lips, which are slightly parted as though frozen mid-thought. A breeze lifts her veil. No one breathes. Then it settles again. The priest blesses the union. The crowd murmurs "Amen." And just like that, the living has married the dead. You shuffle back through the muddy square, unsure whether you've attended a wedding, a funeral, or some strange medieval tax loophole in the shape of a ritual. Someone offers you a honeyed biscuit. You take it. It tastes like sawdust and confusion. Back at your cottage, you tell yourself it was about love, or at least honor, or maybe inheritance. You try to sleep, but the sound of the bell still rings in your head, not joyous, not grieving, just ringing. The sun never quite rises the next day. It just sort of sulks behind the clouds like it's embarrassed to show up. You walk back to the chapel out of sheer curiosity or maybe morbid disbelief, because yesterday you watched a man place a wedding ring on a corpse, and no one stopped him. Not the priest, not the parents, not even the corpse, which, in fairness, had little say in the matter. Inside, candles flicker as if whispering secrets. The coffin's still there. So is the groom. He's seated beside it, holding her hand, or trying to. Rigor mortis isn't exactly cooperative. The bride has begun the long, unglamorous journey into decomposition. But she's still dressed for the occasion white gown, lace veil, and a garland of wilted rosemary atop her brow. If this weren't France in the 1300s, you might think you've wandered into a horror-themed vow renewal. But this is real. This is legally binding. The priest arrives late, looking like he's aged 5 years overnight. He offers communion and tries not to glance at the coffin. He mumbles another prayer, as if unsure whether God handles follow-up ceremonies for the dead. Historians still argue whether such rites were fully sanctioned or quietly tolerated. Some church officials treated corpse marriages as necessary mercies, acts of love or honor that upheld the sacred nature of betrothal. Others denounced them outright, calling them morbid spectacles or even spiritual fraud. It mostly depended on whether you were dealing with theology or land ownership. Today's event is less formal than the yesterdays. The family has gathered, mostly in silence. The bride's mother clutches a piece of lace from her daughter's gown. The groom has clearly not slept. His eyes are red. His hands shake. And when the priest begins the short mass, he stands and places the ring firmly on the bride's finger again, just to be sure. You sit in the back pew, nibbling a crust of yesterday's biscuit. It still tastes like despair. One chronicler once described a similar ceremony in Avignon. The bride had died of plague. The groom married her 2 days later, and the priest blessed their union over a pile of herbs designed to mask the smell. Today's herbs are less effective. The chapel smells like incense, mildew, and something unspoken beginning to rot. After the final prayer, the groom kisses the bride's forehead. It's not sweet. It's not creepy. It's complicated. You watch him linger, forehead pressed against her veil, as if trying to memorize a silence too big for words. Then comes the most medieval detail of all the wedding feast. Yes, there is one. It's already been paid for. After all, there's roast goose, stewed prunes, and 2 musicians who are told, play something respectful. You eat in silence while a man sings a love ballad to a hall full of people, not making eye contact. Someone toasts to eternal love. Someone else sneezes into the wine. The bride, of course, remains upstairs. You would think this was a one-time event, but no. Records show multiple corpse weddings across 14th century France, especially among the nobility where inheritance often mattered more than life expectancy. As one scholar dryly noted, the heart may stop beating, but land still needs managing. At dusk, the coffin is taken to the crypt. The groom follows behind. He's no longer holding her hand. He's holding the contract. You'd think that once a corpse gets married, the paperwork would stop. But no, this is 14th century France, where even the dead have bureaucracy. By dawn, the scribe is already copying the marriage contract onto parchment, carefully noting that the bride was present in body, which is a phrase doing more heavy lifting than it should. The priest signs, the groom signs, the witnesses sign. The bride, naturally, does not, but her name is now legally attached to the groom's estate. And that, you realize, is the real reason this happened. You see, medieval France had a problem. The betrothal wasn't just romantic, it was contractual. Dowries were exchanged, property pledged, and alliances sealed long before anyone actually made it to the altar. If a bride died between engagement and wedding, the groom's family was often still expected to return her dowry. But if the marriage happened even with rigor mortis in attendance, those coins, goats, and land parcels stayed put. Some called it love. Others called it fiscal responsibility, dressed in a funeral veil. Historians still argue whether these post-mortem unions were primarily about love or legal loopholes. One particularly spicy case involved a nobleman who married his dead fiancée to avoid refunding a vineyard. Another featured a wealthy merchant who insisted the ceremony go forward because the wedding gifts were non-refundable. You don't get sentiment like that in fairy tales. There's also the matter of inheritance. If a bride was pregnant and unmarried when her fiancé died, the child would be considered illegitimate, effectively barred from inheriting titles or land. A corpse wedding changed that by marrying the dead father. The mother could retroactively confer legitimacy on the unborn child, granting them a future and herself a pension. One fringe tale, recorded by a monk with a flair for drama, tells of a woman who married her dead lover 3 days after his duel. She wore black lace, exchanged vows beside his open coffin, and gave birth 6 months later to a boy who would grow up to inherit both his father's debts and his sword. The monk described it as romantic and slightly unsanitary. Back in your village, the gossip spreads like jam on warm bread. Some say the bride's family pressured the groom into it. Others whisper that the groom insisted, claiming he'd made a promise and would not dishonor her memory. You wonder if both can be true, if grief and greed often arrive holding hands. The local midwife, who knows everything about everyone, says this wasn't the first dead wedding she's seen. Last winter, a peasant girl was promised to a tanner's apprentice who died in a snowstorm. His parents begged the priest to finish the vows beside the casket. The priest refused, so they did it anyway, in the barn, with a loaf of bread and a cross drawn in soot. Was it legal? Who knows? Was it heartfelt? Definitely. Was it cold? Tragically. You sit by the fire that evening, staring at your own bare fingers. You're unmarried, breathing, technically ahead of the bride, and yet, somehow, she's already Mrs. by now. You've stopped flinching when someone says marriage and corpse in the same sentence. That's just village life. In 14th century France, where everything is a little damp, slightly superstitious, and weirdly legal, today. However, you hear a different phrase whispered through the marketplace by royal decree. Turns out, this wasn't just a local oddity. King Charles VI, yes. That Charles VI. The one who believed he was made of glass and once banned anyone from touching him too firmly, had actually authorized posthumous marriage under very specific conditions. Because when your monarch is mentally unraveling, social norms tend to loosen right along with him. The decree wasn't a free-for-all. It was reserved for betrothed couples who had a legitimate, documented engagement prior to one party's death. This wasn't about marrying random corpses in a foggy chapel. It was about preserving honor, stabilizing families, and occasionally saving face when scandal struck like a falling chamber pot. Historians still debate how often this decree was applied versus how often it was quietly ignored. Some suggest it was mostly used among nobles to retroactively clean up uncomfortable situations like pregnancies, unpaid dowries, or conveniently timed disappearances. Others argue it was genuinely intended as a moral remedy, a royal blessing for those who'd lost a future but still deserved a name. You imagine the royal scribe writing out the order, quill scratching under candlelight. Let it be known that death shall not annul that which was promised in holy betrothal, and then promptly pouring himself a drink. The church, predictably, wasn't thrilled. Canon law required the consent of both parties for a marriage to be valid, and dead people are notoriously hard to pin down for a signature. Some bishops permitted it anyway, especially if pressured by powerful families. Others refused, citing moral confusion and the smell. One French cleric reportedly walked out of a funeral wedding mid-sermon, declaring, "This is not what Christ had in mind." Still, the law stood, at least for a time. Back in your village, people now speak of the groom with a strange blend of admiration and unease. Some say he's a romantic, others say he's cursed. Children dare each other to touch the chapel door at night. The baker swears he saw a candle flicker in the crypt after midnight. The midwife says probably mice, but the children prefer ghosts. You pass the groom In the square one afternoon, he looks thinner, quieter, like someone slowly dissolving into memory. He nods at you. You nod back. Neither of you speaks. That evening, the blacksmith's wife says the royal decree gives people hope. Hope for what you ask. She shrugs. That promises still count, even after everything. Which is a lovely thought if you don't think about the logistics. You visit the chapel again, just to look. The candle near her tomb is still burning. No one knows who keeps lighting it, but it stays lit as you leave. You glance at the stained glass window above the altar. It shows Saint Denis holding his own decapitated head. You've seen enough weddings lately to know in France, the dead are surprisingly busy. 3 weeks later, word arrives that the bride was pregnant. That changes everything again. Now, the posthumous wedding isn't just a morbid curiosity. It's a legal necessity. Because in 14th century France, a child born out of wedlock has about the same rights as a borrowed mule. But a child born after a posthumous marriage entirely legitimate, inheritable, proper, suddenly. The coffin wedding seems less like a scandal and more like a clever, if deeply unsettling insurance policy. You wouldn't think a funeral could double as prenatal care. But here we are. The midwife confirms it, as the girl had been a few months along. Maybe 3, maybe 4. The child, if born, will be the groom's legal heir. And the groom, he's now a widower and a future father. Both things he hadn't exactly planned on managing simultaneously. Historians still argue whether this loophole allowing a woman to marry her dead fiancé to secure legitimacy for a future child was a compassionate act or a cynical one. Some scholars claim it protected women from ruin in a society that punished them for everything from sneezing too freely to daring to survive a man. Others say it allowed elite families to maintain control over property lines, especially when a child meant more land, more alliances, and fewer awkward questions. Back in the village, the talk grows hushed but urgent. The candle in the chapel still burns. The priest has been asked to bless the unborn child. The groom has retreated from public life. He's seen mostly pacing the garden or staring at the sky as if waiting for it to collapse. One account from another town tells of a similar case. A woman, visibly pregnant, stood beside her fiancé's coffin as vows were exchanged. She cried so hard her veil clung to her face like a second skin. At one point, the priest had to pause the ceremony so she could be sick. The witnesses called it tragic. The record called it resolved. And the ring. Yes, the ring was a problem. You see, placing a ring on a corpse's finger isn't as easy as it sounds. Swelling happens. Rigor mortis stiffens joints. There are stories, too many stories of priests asking someone to just tilt the coffin a bit, or of mourners forced to place the ring on top of the hand and hope for divine understanding. One chronicler notes a case in which the ring was simply tied to the bride's wrist with ribbon and declared symbolic. Another describes the groom slipping the ring on the bride's toe. It counted. He wrote, "So long as someone cried, here in your village, the pregnancy becomes the talk of the market. Some say it's a miracle. Others mutter about improper timing. The blacksmith's apprentice boldly asks if the child will inherit ghost money. He is promptly sent to shovel something less metaphorical. The midwife, meanwhile, prepares the birthing chamber, linen sheets, holy water, a carved charm to keep away bad spirits just in case. She hums while she works. This isn't her first scandal. It likely won't be her last. You find yourself standing outside the chapel again, watching the candlelight flicker through the stained glass. One flame for the dead, one more coming for the living. In France, it seems, marriage doesn't end at the grave. Sometimes, it begins there. You don't expect a wedding with a corpse to come with a second act. But this one has rumors, suspicion, and just enough mystery to qualify as the village's most awkward crime story. It starts with whispers low, scandal-laced, and punctuated with knowing glances over baskets of cabbage. She didn't just die. Someone mutters at the well. She was helped. You hear it again at the baker's stall. The timing was too convenient. At first, it sounds like nonsense. The bride died of fever. They said, everyone saw her cough, collapse, fade. But now that there's an heir on the way, a legal inheritance guaranteed, and a wedding no one can unsee, people are starting to do the math, and the math is deeply unromantic. Historians still argue whether these corpse marriages were occasionally used to cover up more than just grief. Some believe that, in rare cases, one party stood to gain so much property, legitimacy, influence, that a sudden death wasn't tragic. It was timely. The records don't say murder, but they hint. They raise eyebrows in Latin. You overhear a traveling friar describe a case in Rouen where the bride's accident occurred a week after a major dowry payment. The groom insisted on a funeral wedding. The priest refused. The priest was reassigned. Another tale tells of a noblewoman who married her dead fiancé with such haste that the banns hadn't even been posted. The ink on the dowry wasn't dry, but the grave certainly was. And her new in-laws, strangely absent. Back in your village, the groom's behavior becomes stranger. He visits the chapel at night, lights candles, leaves flowers, speaks to the tomb. Some call it devotion. Others call it guilt with good posture. And then there's the smell. The chapel was built for quiet reflection, not long-term storage. The bride's body was supposed to be moved to the family crypt, but weeks later, she's still lying beneath the altar. And though the incense burns continuously, a certain musk has begun to seep into the stone. Guests have stopped lingering after Mass. The midwife, ever practical, shrugs and says, it's just rot. But even she admits the smell is oddly strong for such a short time. Someone whispers the word poison. Another says rat bane. The cook insists it's just the season. Everyone nods. No one believes them. One morning, you spot the steward scrubbing the chapel threshold. Hard, too hard. When you ask why, he simply says, there was a stain. You don't ask what kind. Historians often debate whether the corpse marriage craze was an expression of emotional desperation or cold calculation. But here, in the heart of a village with one too many secrets, it feels like both. You pass the groom in the square again. He doesn't see you. He's looking at the chapel window, eyes wide, face pale, as though he's not sure whether he's seeing a reflection or a witness. A week later, the bishop arrives unannounced. He prays over the tomb, blesses the unborn child, and strongly recommends burial. That night, the coffin is finally sealed and lowered into the crypt. The flame in the chapel still burns, but now it's behind a locked gate. And just like that, the gossip cools. Not because the mystery is solved, but because everyone's too scared to solve it. In France, marriage might bind two souls forever. Even if one soul never got the chance to protest, you would think that after a wedding, a funeral, and a scandal with lingering odor, things might quiet down. But this is France in the 14th century, where bureaucracy doesn't sleep, and the church occasionally draws the line at "I now pronounce you husband," and, recently embalmed, word spreads a local bishop has ruled that no further marriage posthum ceremonies may proceed without his direct approval. This, of course, has the opposite effect. It doesn't stop the weddings, it just makes people sneakier. You begin hearing about alternate ceremonies, not held in chapels, but barns, not attended by priests, but paid witnesses in a conveniently bilingual notary. If you can't marry your dead fiancé in the eyes of the church, you can still do it in the eyes of paperwork. It's not holy, but it is binding in a medieval France. That's close enough to magic. One enterprising couple near Tours used a wax figure to stand in for a dead bride. She had glass eyes, a painted smile, and a silk veil pinned lovingly to her candle-stiff hair. The groom recited vows with trembling hands. The priest refused to attend, so they brought in a retired monk who claimed to have seen worse. The marriage was recorded, notarized, and even included in the year's tax rolls. No one asked what happened to the wax doll, hopefully not melted into candles. Historians still argue whether these mock corpse weddings were acts of grief-stricken desperation or shrewd legal performances. One fringe theory suggests that some families staged them as theatrical closure, a kind of medieval cosplay for emotional resolution. Another theory says they were pure strategy, a workaround for laws that didn't quite know what to do with love, death, and land titles all in the same week. There's also the mirror ritual. You hear about this from the midwife, of all people. She says a woman in Lyon once stood in front of a mirror at midnight, wearing her dead lover's cloak, and recited her vows to his reflection. She then slept with a lock of his hair under her pillow and declared herself married. When asked why, she reportedly said, "He asked me to." You decide not to ask how she got the lock of hair. Closer to home. Someone tries something even more awkward. A widow attempts to marry her late fiancé's ghost. There is no body, he was lost in a river, but she insists his spirit still visits. She sets a table for two, speaks aloud during dinner, and eventually hosts a blessing where she wears his boots and swears eternal fidelity. The priest says nothing, mostly because he's hiding behind a curtain. Even the local scribe grows tired. He's had to register 5 such marriages in 3 months, and his ink budget is suffering. One entry simply reads, "Bride present. Groom, formerly so," which frankly feels accurate. By now, you've stopped being surprised. You've seen a dead girl get married, a living girl marry her grief, and an entire village slowly agree that maybe this is just how things are now. What started as rare and solemn has become, well, normalized. A bride, a ring, a body, a signature. And if the body is already cold, that's just a detail. You'd think the strangest part of a corpse marriage would be the ceremony. But no, it's what happens after. You return to your village carrying the memory of a wedding no one wants to talk about. And suddenly everything is slightly off kilter. The baker wraps his loaves tighter. The priest avoids eye contact with his own altar. And the neighbors, well, the neighbors whisper, "It's not right." Someone says behind a bundle of firewood, "You can't build a future with someone buried in it." And yet, here you are living among people who act as though that bride still walks the chapel steps. The groom, to his credit, or maybe his doom, begins appearing in public again. He nods to passers-by, visits the market, even sits through mass. But no one asks him about the wedding. Not because they're polite, because they're terrified he might answer when he walks past. Conversations trail off like smoke. Children are pulled behind skirts. One farmer insists his cow stop giving milk after seeing the couple kiss. Historians still debate how these marriages were received socially. Legally, yes, they counted. But in small communities, social memory was longer than any law. A widow could remarry and reclaim her place. A corpse bride. She never left the walls. Stories cling to her like moss. Some villagers call the chapel cursed. One man claims his lantern blew out every time he passed the crypt door. Another says he saw 2 shadows where there should have been 1. The midwife rolls her eyes and mutters something about bad stew. But even she walks faster when it's dark. You hear rumors from other towns. A girl in Burgundy married her drowned fiancé's corpse in secret. The parishioners discovered it when she insisted on a double gravestone with space for wedding vows. The townsfolk refused to bury her next to him when she died. He already left once. They said, no need to reward that. One fringe tale involves a bride who married her dead betrothed in a storm-soaked chapel, only for his body to vanish the next morning. Some say it was stolen. Others say he rose and walked. Either way, no one ever moved into the house they'd prepared together. It still stands, empty doors ajar, vines swallowing the windows like time erasing a secret. Back in your village, the pregnancy advances. The midwife prepares linens. The cradle is carved. The child will be legitimate, titled, maybe even landholding. But the villagers can't decide whether to coo or cross themselves. Born of grief, they say. The child of both vows and silence. And the bride, she remains in the chapel. Her tomb is marked with her new married name. The date's carved carefully. One bouquet always rests beside it, never fresh, never stolen. No one claims it. Everyone suspects the groom. No one asks. You visit one evening, just to look. The candle burns low. The stone feels cold. You say nothing, but you stay a moment longer than usual. Just long enough to wonder whether memory itself can be married, whether grief wears a veil, whether some names ever stop being whispered. In France, the wedding may end, but the story always stays. You are older now, not ancient, but old enough to feel the years folding behind you like stiff linens in a chest. The bride is long buried. The child has been born, and he toddles around the chapel courtyard with the serious frown of someone who knows, somehow, that his very existence began with a vow and a funeral bell. And the groom, he still lives in the manor, alone but not quite solitary. People say he talks to her, that he keeps her wedding veil draped over the armchair by the hearth, that he reads aloud to no one some nights. Voice quiet, like a prayer disguised as conversation. Maybe it's grief. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's just love stretched to its most threadbare form. The village, too, has softened. The scandal has faded, like any story retold too many times. The whispers are quieter now, padded with nostalgia. Children ask, "Is it true?" And their elders nod, though the truth has grown. Edges no one dares sand down. You walk through the chapel one last time. The air smells of old stone, beeswax, and memory. The bride's tomb is clean. The lettering still crisp her name, her birth, her death, and her marriage, forever wedged between them like a door that opened and closed at once. Historians still argue whether these corpse marriages were acts of devotion or desperation. But as you stand in this hush of flickering candlelight, the question seems almost impolite. What matters is that they happened, that someone loved so fiercely, or needed so urgently, that they crossed the border between the living and the dead with ink, prayer, and trembling fingers. Outside, the village exhales. The trees rustle with late summer wind. The midwife hums to the boy as he plays. The priest sleeps in his chair. And the baker has finally stopped calling his scones morning cakes. You pause at the chapel door and look back one last time. The candle still burns not brightly, but steadily. You wonder who lights it now. Perhaps the groom. Perhaps the child. Perhaps someone who believes that vows, once spoken, even to silence, still count. You head home under a silver sky, your feet brushing the dust of old footsteps, the kind that only show up when the light hits just right. The world is quieter now, not still, but soft. And as the village settles into sleep, so do you, breathing slower, holding the story like a folded note. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to remember.